are going to be talking about the power of the company podcast. And it's great to be here with some hosts of some of the best out there in the space. Always a little bit nerve-wracking to be talking with hosts. So hopefully not too much judgment and we can go through and enjoy a really nice hour together. So I'm joined by Eric, Sam and Christian. And I believe Justin is waiting in the back, and here he is, perfect, just in time. So I'm going to hand over to the guys just to do a little bit of an introduction, tell you a little bit about where they come from, their podcast. Definitely go give them a follow because they work very hard to produce some amazing content. So I'll hand over first to Eric, who's on there.
Hey, Stephen, thanks for the intro. Eric Melcher here. I host a podcast called Innovators Can Laugh. It's just casual conversations with startups founders based in Europe. The show is a very friendly conversation, like coffee, like chat with them. And I have one thing for the guests when they come on. I tell them the show will not get published if there's not a point in the conversation where we're not laughing and just sharing, a funny story or something. So we truly try to live up to our name called Innovators Can Laugh. It's more than 120 episodes, been doing it for, oh my God, it's going to be 3 years now. It seems like it's been shorter than that, but I've been enjoying it, and I'm happy to be here and sit among some other great podcasters like Christian and, of course, Sam.
Awesome. Over to you, Sam.
Cool. Yeah, my name's Sam Dunning. I host Business Growth Show. I think we're 360 or so episodes in, but essentially it's no BS B2B marketing interviews with practitioners. So no background stories, anything like that. We just get straight into a topic that's relevant to their area of expertise. 30, 40 minutes of tactical advice on what's working for them day to day in the field to drive qualified pipeline and revenue. And we also do solo episodes from myself. That's, again, just on one specific B2B marketing tip. Yes, Business Growth Show if you want to check it out.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. And over to you, Christian.
I'll tell my story in short. So I'm the host of Tech Ponsas podcast. We basically realized that B2B is personal and people buy from people. So whenever you go to a company like Dealfront, you need to know the people behind it, the salespersons, the founders. So we decided to create this podcast where you see the real stories behind the companies that have real success. So Alex, our CEO, started the podcast. I joined the startup at 19 years old. I asked too many questions and he said, you asked too many questions. I don't have time to be a CEO. Why don't you do the podcast instead of me? And there you can ask all the great founders all the questions that you have about entrepreneurship. So just grew from there. I was really, really bad at the start. So that's proving that anybody can start a podcast and make it successful.
And I guess
Hey, sorry, Justin, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. And I'm Justin Zimmerman from partnerplaybooks.com, which started off as a community project. Basically, I one day found my job no longer available and decided I didn't want to go back into the corporate world and go do it again, sell all my talents for a fraction of what they're worth. And so I said, let me invest in myself. And so let me take that little bit of severance I got and see how far I can make it last and go. And so in the partnership world, specifically B2B partnerships, a lot in the HubSpot tech ecosystem space, there was a gap, a hole in content, and whether it was blogs, playbooks, webinars, podcasts, I did what I took and did best for basically doing webinars and podcasts for literally this microphone I got in 2006. And so people are like, it sounds great. And I guess what? It's almost 20 years old. Crazy to think about it that way. And so finally took all the skills, all the things I'd been selling to companies, pointed at myself, pointed at my yet to be determined and defined business, and started building an audience, started building a network, started building relationships in the space. And so only once a month, I host a live webinar that gets transformed into a podcast. And so you can see here with all the people in space in the industry, and I would call it strategically around the topics and titles that I know eventually I'm going to offer or was going to eventually offer services and sales around. And so lo and behold, people would join my events. I've got a lead qualification system I've built that's built into that process to join my webinars that now people want, they see in action. And so by being my own guinea pig of my own process and services, by building a community and a podcast and a following. People see the results. They see hundreds of people register. They see all the leads that come from it when they sponsor it. And then guess what? They want those products and they want those services. And so it's kind of a real holistic approach to where what I do and share and act through the podcasts and then webinars, then I go write about, and it just creates this virtuous cycle of success, results, and then interest in my products and services.
Oh, that's really cool, Justin. That leads us really nicely into kind of our first touch point, is how the kind of B2B podcast landscape has evolved over time. And it kind of seems that you touched on a few points that it's really kind of added multiple layers. So do you want to start us off on that particular question?
Yeah, if I had to think about it pretty clearly in retrospect, I don't know if I was strategic, but now that I look back on it, it was the right order of operations, which is like podcasts are like part of like an integrated play. And so like the topics you cover and the people that you bring on, and not just the content repurposing downstream side of it, but the like, hey, how does this fit into the audiences that we're trying to attract and demonstrate value and results from? And so I know that if someone wanted to hire me full time and come in and do this, which I really am not interested in the moment or at all, it would be the same approach. Is like, you know, what is the audience and what are those topics, and then how do we build, whether it's our own expertise, which is probably the best place to come from, or our customers' expertise as a proxy, to come in and make everything really tactical and not a product pitch, right? You don't want to be all about your product, but you want to talk about the results and pain points and problems that are being solved with your product as part of that process. And so I would say start with community and then bring community into content, and then content can be podcasts, webinars, all the outcomes of that, and then involve your community in that process. And so last point is, I didn't know I was starting a community. People would just join these things and say, Justin, I'm so glad to be part of your community. I'm like, oh, people are feeling something here around the shows and the events. And so then there is a more formal way to put that community together, and we can get into that stuff for the other moments that we have available today.
That is awesome when things grow organically. So, Eric, how do you believe that the B2B podcast space has evolved?
Well, I think it's evolved similar to what people say about like a personal brand, right? For a company that Elon Musk has 10 times more followers than Tesla. I think Richard Branson has a lot more followers than Virgin Atlantic, right? And I think B2B companies realize that when it comes to podcasting. And so they don't want to just put out content just to put out content, because it is a lot of work to create a podcast and distribute it and try to market it. And I think the B2B brands that have gotten it right are those that really invest in multiple podcasts. Drift, for example, that's a SaaS company. I think they have 7 different podcasts now. They've been very, very successful. And one of the reasons is because they don't know what was going to work. They didn't know what type of content that they were going to produce was really going to resonate in the marketplace. And so that's why they created multiple podcasts to get their shows out there and have different hosts and different topics. Even IBM has 15 different podcasts. They recognize that we don't really know what people out there are going to like. And so that's why they're investing in these different podcasts. HubSpot, everybody's familiar with them. I think they have more than 30 different podcasts now in the HubSpot network. And so to answer your question, it's changing in the sense that the companies that are doing it very smart are investing in an array of different podcasts, because they really do not know which one is going to work. So whether they produce multiple shows or they sponsor multiple shows, that's how it's evolved compared to 3 or 4 years ago when they just tried to produce one show and just really market that one show.
So that leads really nicely kind of into the next question, is around where would you start when looking to build a podcast? And Sam, maybe you can kind of touch upon your journey and how you started, and potentially where people can find their way in the podcasting world.
Yeah, basically do the opposite of what I did when I started a podcast 4 years ago. Because when I started a podcast, I did it for very selfish reasons. And it was, even when I started, actually, it was called Sam's Business Growth Show. That shows you how selfish it was. And essentially, I just interviewed people I wanted to learn from. So I just interviewed like entrepreneurs, marketers, business owners, basically anyone that I saw on LinkedIn that I thought, this person has done something I want to do. I just invited them on the show, and to my surprise, they said yes. And then we racked up probably 50, 75 episodes of just me learning their story, asking them questions around how they've grown their business or their following or the marketing they're doing. And then I thought, this is cool. I'm learning a lot and I'm sharing some ideas with the audience, but it's not really giving any business value to my company, and it's not strategic. So I'd say the first thing is, yes, if you're doing it for your own learning and benefit, fine. But if you want to get something out of it from a point, you've got to think what that is and tie that to something that's probably linked back to your own area of expertise. So in my case, I made a mind shift, which was, well, I'm gonna link this to B2B marketing. So we're going to rename it Business Growth Show, B2B Marketing and Demand Generation Podcast. We're going to take a bit of a point of view. So we're going to do the guest episodes with practitioners where we just kind of talk about their specific area of expertise. That might be paid media, demand generation, LinkedIn ads, whatever, SEO. And I'm going to do solo episodes so I can share my own expertise, web design, SEO, starting a podcast, whatever, and really focus down. And once I took that focus and kind of made those episodes once a week on a dedicated topic, then the show growth started to kind of go up. We started to drive awareness and, most importantly, kind of qualified pipeline for those services. And likewise, guests said, like, this is a bit different to what I've done before. So I think focus is probably one of the first things. Like, as a host, what do you actually want to get as an outcome of this show? Is it you just want to learn? Do you want to build brand? Do you actually want to drive qualified pipeline? Do you want it to be a content pillar? Do you want it to be a content engine? I.e., you're going to do a live stream, a webinar? Are you going to do a podcast recorded offline and then replay the video, the audio, make blog posts out of it, do shorts, get the guest to promote it? Or if it's solo episode, you're going to promote it, put it on YouTube? Because there's so many things you can do with a podcast, but do the opposite of what I did. Have a clear idea of the outcomes that you want, and then think about how you can bring that to fruition. Is probably the best piece of advice I could say.
Awesome. And Christine, do you want to tell us a little bit about your backstory? And I know you touched upon it a little at the start there.
I would add that it's really important to get the best person or the top 5 most well-known persons from your network. And that way, when you invite the other people, you already have some examples of big names. So that's one tip that I would add. But I totally agree with Sam. So you need to think about community building. And once you have an example of a successful podcast with a known name, and as you said, it's easier for them to reply whenever rather than what you imagine. So yeah, that's my tip.
Awesome. And maybe let's touch upon maybe kind of some of the common pitfalls or things that we can maybe watch out for when starting out. I'm sure a few of those have been found along the way. Eric, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls is not having a clear strategy before you go into the recording with the guest of what you're hoping to get out of it, right? And so a lot of that comes into the pre-interview phase of having them let you know whether it's a pre-registration form or a pre-interview form, what do they know so well that they can talk about for probably 30 minutes just out of the blue, right? They could teach somebody something, do a workshop on something, because that's something that you could hone in on and try to pull that information out, pull that knowledge out that's going to be valuable to the audience, right? And so you want to have a good understanding of what it is, what kind of value that you're going to provide the listener before you even start recording. And I think that's something that I didn't do I didn't do well early on. And it's something that I learned over time. So now before I go into a show recording, I have a really good picture of what type of value I'm trying to pull from the guest that I can then share with the audience through storytelling.
Justin, yourself?
I tend to bring some contrary opinions to this. I used to be like let's be the nicest, most valuable, value rich, like give them everything, let's put it all out there for our audience. All that matters is the customer experience and the audience's experience and the value that we bring. And I've got a little picture here I point to. I built a 13-person content team around content repurposing and methodology, and we were just all in for 5 years on content. I'm not saying that wasn't the right thing to do maybe then, but one of the things that was really missed that I look back on now, and whatever the medium is how are we creating calls to action and escalation to pull the people who are currently in market? How do we identify them? How do we speak to them? How do we put those little messages? And we're afraid to call them ads, or we're afraid to ask for more information. We're afraid to talk to the audience and tell them directly, hey, go do this. In fact, I'm going to go do that right now because I'm going to be. And so what I bring on shows when there's a live thing is I'll bring like some sort of escalation piece here, which is like one of my slide decks tied to exactly one of the topics, how to drive 1,000 registrants to a webinar. And I'll tease them and I'll flip. You're going to get this, 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 and this. And so if you're currently a B2B marketer and need help driving better results from your webinars, and then I put this little tab here, and as I hold your phone up to the screen, and this will be automatically sent to you. And I'll say, pause, really hold it up to your screen. And so, right, that was totally impromptu. I was not planning on that. But like things like that to like get the people who are in the audience right now taking some sort of action that lets them raise their hand, fill out a poll, hold their phone up, pull them out of their just native kind of latent cheerleading, sitting on the sideline state. And for those who have really pain points and problems, well, that's what the podcast is for. That's what the webinar is for. We want to talk to you right now because the topic got you here, but the call to action is going to get them further down the pipeline. And so if you think through like the funnel side of what happens next, if the right people show up on your shows, then I've got, and that's actually tied to a Zap that then connects to my HubSpot, that then has a follow-up sequence, right? And now that, and then if they go through that follow-up sequence, right, and connect it to some pipeline. So there's ways to do it, and you could put it in the show notes if it's an audio only. But nevertheless, I just think that if we don't think about the hooks and the calls to action and advertising on our own show. This show is brought to you by Dealfront, right? The number one blank for blank. And if you don't know what Dealfront is, let's just take a couple of seconds right now and talk about it because, they're paying the bills to give you this value and this content. And so people will be understanding, right? And so I've just learned to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more ask so we can get the value that is possible when you have 15, 200, right? Like 1,000 people on a webinar, right? Or your audience. And so, anyways, back to you.
No, I think that adds a lot of value, and I think that's what kind of differentiates from a B2B podcast to a B2C, where you kind of within the B2C you're trying to keep that engagement and keep on driving audience, which you have to do within the B2B space, but it's also important to actually return on investment for sure.
Yeah, our bosses are going to ask, how is this contributing to anything measurable? And so if you don't, and I think that might be actually the more reasons to do it, because then if you think about attribution, you're going to do things that have attributable value. Holding up a thing, we got 10, 20 downloads of the slide deck, right? So anyways, put a text me number and I'll send you this thing. All right, you guys know how it all works.
Yeah. I'd add in there. It depends what you want to get out of the podcast, right? Because from my experience, there's 3 or 4 different plays. There's probably more as well. Like you said there, you can prompt the prospect to take an action. But from a B2B standpoint, a lot of companies now are doing it as an ABM, like an account-based marketing play. So they're using the podcast to invite prospects that they'd never normally get the chance to speak to. So in my case, I don't know, CMOs of 100 plus staff, SaaS companies, or VPs marketing, whatever. I'll invite them onto the show. All I've got to say is I run a top 10 B2B marketing podcast. Chris Walker was on it recently. I don't know, another famous marketer. And they're like, yeah, sure. When can we book it? So it's a very nice play to strike up relationships with potential prospects and build up conversations that you'd never get off a cold call or cold email, or very unlikely. So that's one play. But on the same notion, you can't do it for the sake of it. You still got to do a good show with them. Or in my case, challenge them and make sure they actually provide actionable advice. Otherwise, it's just going to be fluff and they're just going to get bored, and so is your audience. Another play is probably a bit close to what you said just then, so like thought leadership. And that could be guest episodes, but that could be a solo episode on a specific actionable topic that you can share advice on, thoughts. You can share problems in the industry or your standpoint or your point of view on the industry or a certain topic. I suppose another angle of it is fame, where you just purely get someone that's super famous in your industry and you bring them on purely to give your show a bit of belt and then hope that they're going to promote it on social to their email list. And just because you've got a kind of big guest name, you're looking to build the audience from that standpoint. So that's probably 3 ways that you could grow a podcast, depending on what the business outcomes you want as a result of it.
Those are 3 really good ways that Sam mentioned. The ABM piece, if you work that correctly, it could be very powerful. Last year when I was at OptiMonk, I was actually inviting people to be on OptiMonk's podcast that was hosted by my colleague. And these were agency owners. They were like our ideal target market. and most of them accepted. They would come on the show. And then after it went live, after a couple of weeks, I would actually have Nikki, who is the CEO, send me an email, and it went something like this: like, "Hey, Eric, so and so was recently on our podcast. I think he would be perfect for OptiMonk. Can you just let him know that I'd be happy to give him a free demo, and we'd waive the we'd extend the free trial from 14 days to like 60 days or something for him, right?" And that was just all like this sort of like flywheel strategy to like get people on the show. They got to know us a little bit, and then they felt like they were being treated like a VIP because they got this email or this acknowledgement from the CEO of the company. And it was just a really good way to work that ABM piece if you do it, if you do it correctly, if you do it in a smart way. It was a lot of fun too.
I also want to add a story, including Stefan. So because of the visibility of the podcast, SaaStock, the largest SaaS conference in Europe, invited me to host a live podcast at their conference in Ireland.
That's cool.
And then we also talk about hosting a morning run. So I met Stefan at the morning run at 6 a.m. in Dublin through a bit of rain. So the relationship and network that you can build with podcast is amazing. Infinite ROI.
Okay, wait a minute. Was this a morning run when you guys were still drunk? Because I'm hearing Dublin, and I'm not even thinking that there was a big hangover here, right?
Yeah, there are 40 people.
I just have a quick variation on the ABM to podcast play. And so, like I said, I started with community, and so one of the things that I do is, writing and speaking and putting yourself out here, like through things like this, people hear it. I like that guy. Oh, he said something important, right? It works. Like, you can't track that, but you should do that. But then what ends up happening is, I see this because we're all in B2B, is that have people come and find me on LinkedIn, and then like, oh, there's Justin, and they'll inbound me, and then I'll read their title and I'll see who they are, and what'll end up happening if it's an account or a company that I'm like, oh, that's a good company to have in my group. What I'll do is I'll send an invitation to them to come, and I'll ask them, would you like to join my specific narrow group? If you think about like communities and groups are a lot like podcasts. Like you said, Drift has like 7 or 10 different ones, and I'm sure they're like segmented by like title or audience, right? And so if you think about the same thing, it's really just a channel for whether it's written text or audio. It doesn't matter. It's just like cohorts of people who do similar jobs with similar titles want to be around others who are doing it so they can listen and learn. And it doesn't really matter the medium. And so you can order the operations in any way you want. And so my play on the ABM is, when I find a company or account, I'll say, oh, good, this would be a good name. Like, I got Zapier, Stripe, HubSpot, Aircall, like really big, great names, Microsoft in my little group, right? And it's just one person, but that logo acquire for the sake of like the branding of the group makes it infinitely easier to then go ask out to other people, say, hey, these people are in here. And so it creates a flywheel. And then once I have their attention, and I use a Slack Connect channel, so that way it shows up in their native like workspace. It's not an extra space they have to go like monitor. Now I've got access to their world. Hey, what's up? Make a post in the channel, share an invitational link. Hey, here's the podcast episode, whatever it may be. And so for me, it's a little bit more scalable of an approach, because you can only do so many podcasts with so many target people, but you can like invite, here's the mastermind group for CEOs doing blank and blank. I just thought you might like to join because Microsoft, HubSpot, blah, blah, blah. And these names are in there. Whoop, now you're in their space. They're chatting and connecting. And then whenever you need to go in there and do something, in fact, that's actually how I got one of my first big deals with my new tool. Is Zoom Info like company had been following me, seeing my stuff, reached out to me, and then they were in that group and we chatted, and then it turned into a deal. So it works. And that was actually not as proactive, but it could be probably more proactive than that. But I only got so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
Well, that goes on nicely into...
Yeah, you know it, at Dealfront, you're present at all the conferences, all the people there. So social selling is also something that's into podcasting, a benefit of it. So yeah.
So that's a nice segue into our next section around building trust. It definitely builds trust within the community of speakers within the different companies that you get to work with. But how do you transition that into building trust with audiences as well? Maybe Eric, you can kick us off there.
Well, a lot of trust comes within the guests that you have on the show, right? So a lot of people may not know who you are, but maybe they know who that guest is because they're familiar with that guest's content, maybe on LinkedIn, or maybe they know that guest from an event or webinar, whatever. So I think that's how trust is built. For me, Europe, there's like 30 plus countries in Europe. And so when I started out, I specifically focused on one country at a time. And I think I interviewed 20 Romanian startup founders first before I moved on to another country. And then I did Lithuania and I did 20 startup founders there. And then I moved to the Netherlands and did like 15 there, then to Bulgaria. So I did one country at a time. And that really helped me go deep within that community, within that country, and just built that trust there versus being all over the place, having a founder from Greece one day, and then next week it was from, Belgium or somewhere else. So that's what helped me. I can't really speak with everybody else, but once those communities saw that, oh, wow, he had 4 or 5 entrepreneurs from Bulgaria, I'm Bulgarian, then yeah, let me listen to this guy because I know some of those people. And that really just helped me long term versus another like spray and pray approach.
Great. And Sam, maybe you can touch on that as well.
Yeah, so a lot of what I say is more from a revenue generation standpoint and actually making cash from your podcast from a B2B perspective. So I would say a lot of shows that have guests on, so let's say the interview format, aren't great. A lot of B2B podcasts suck. They're literally 30 minutes of pure, what is your background? And almost all podcasts are like that. Like there's no differentiation. So if you're going to do guest interviews, you want to drill into this guest. Like you want to take, if you're going to ask them questions, don't just ask a question, take their answer and then leave it at that. You want to probe into it. So they give you an answer like, I don't know, what do you think's working today in B2B marketing? And they say, LinkedIn thought leadership content. Okay, why? Can you give me an example? Can you give me an idea of when you posted something, it flopped? Can you give me an idea of where perhaps when your CEO posted something, what was it specifically? What business outcomes came? How many views did it get? What kind of interactions did you get? Did you get any inbounds off it? Dive in tactically, give your opinion. Then you might say, oh, that's nice. This is something I did myself on LinkedIn and this is how that worked. So add your 2 cents, add your opinion, add your thoughts and dig deep. Otherwise, it's just another B2B interview show. That's one angle. And the other angle, I think, if you want to build trust with your audience at scale, I think you should be doing solo episodes as well. So I think if you really want to put across your thoughts, ideally on your area of expertise, so in my case, that's SEO, websites and podcasts, and I'll do solo episodes dedicated to those topics, just on a little snippet of what I know and what I've done, what's battle tested. So I think a mix of that, and then obviously the replay value, the fact that you can pump that out into little clips, into LinkedIn, into your email list, and have call to action. Then it's going to be a kind of super firepower for building trust at scale.
Yeah, I'd like to double down on that because, I think, one of my first episodes, I wrote this playbook on partner webinars. And then I was like, well, maybe instead of a guest, I'll just present my own thing here and see what happens. And maybe like 5 minutes before the show, I'm like, my buddy's like, hey, do you have a call to action? Are you going to like try to sell anything? I'm like, I really don't know. He's like, well, do something. I'm like, okay, fine, I did. And so like I presented this whole thing. And at the end, I'm like, hey, I've got this kind of not call to action here. But if you liked anything you heard or saw and you want some of the systems and blah, 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 blah. Well, I go raise your hand or hit yes on the poll. Went. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, well, geez, that worked. And so like you said, demonstrating like your core competencies as like a playbook, as an approach, and the pain points you've solved, and if you're a consultant or an individual brand builder, kind of like, and like some of us here, but I could also see that apply to getting into the nitty gritty of your company's solution as a playbook, right? And so it works, right? It's like, yeah, guests sometimes and your own, and then come back. You be like, hey, we just implemented version 2, version 3, version 4. The world changes. There's new things that happen. So it's like, and so, I definitely have seen that work. That's how I got my first real like B2B webinar client.
Yeah. I would say that, all of us here, we're probably listening to podcasts. I would think so. I mean, Sam, you probably listen to 5, 6 or 7. Am I right?
I listen to probably 3 at the moment. There's 3 that I alternate.
Okay, so we all alternate. And I think the average person alternates between like 5 and 8 podcasts, right? But not all of them are podcasts that we go to learn something. There's at least one in my selection that I listen to in my playlist that I go to just because I just like the host, right? I mean, sure, there's maybe something valuable that you get from it, but I feel like I'm just hanging out from him or with him. He's funny, good personality. And it's one of those things, like if I get tired of listening to all the other podcasts that are business related, and I just want to just chill out and just listen to some content that I enjoy, then that's where that type of podcast may come in. So in the B2B space, sure, we're all here to learn something, but not all the business podcasts out there not every episode needs to be valuable. It needs to be, educational. There's got to be something that you're going to learn X, Y, Z from. I think a lot of people would turn into Justin's webinars, not so much because they're going to learn something, but because they've gotten to know Justin.
No one learns anything on my webinars. That's actually
they trust him.
Sorry.
And they probably like him. And so, it's just one of those things. Sam, you too. Your content, me and Linda were talking the other day, Linda Malone, and we're just talking about how funny your videos are, some of them on LinkedIn. And I think people would tune in to your show, not necessarily because they're going to get some sort of instruction on SEO from it, but because they like your personality.
It's a great point. Yeah, it's a great point. Like you say, it doesn't necessarily need to be educate. It could be to entertain, to provide new ideas, to take a different standpoint. You're right. There's a lot of angles that you can go with it.
Yeah. I mean, some of my favorite episodes from my own show, I can't tell you what the audience got from it, but I can tell you that I cried laughing so hard during that conversation because their story was just so funny. And I think anybody would have a good time listening to it, and they can relate being an entrepreneur, facing all these obstacles, and then something just, crazy happens and it just turns the tide. A lot of people can relate to that, especially entrepreneurs.
So, Eric, touching on that, could you kind of provide some examples of where podcasts have helped kind of humanize a brand and how kind of businesses can look to potentially use that as a new way to connect with their audience?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to the Drift example, because all of their podcasts, there's 7 of them, they're hosted by their actual employees from different departments in the company. And so I think that definitely helps not just grow brand affinity, but it makes it look like, okay, that's just not a company, but there's people behind that company that people have gotten to know. And they're kind of rooting for that company and cheering for that company specifically because of, those people. Dream Data, they don't even have a podcast, but I know all about that company because of Laura Erdem and some of the other people who talk about that company on LinkedIn through social selling. They do things like having a run wherever she goes and there's a conference, and they've done a great job at it through their social content, right? And so
Yes.
Companies that are trying to do this through podcasts, I think the ones that have done a good job are, again, the ones that are focusing on multiple different podcasts or sponsoring multiple different podcasts, like HubSpot is, with their array of different podcasts and different topics and different hosts. And I may never listen to 29 of the other podcasts that HubSpot sponsors, but I can tell you everything about their product because there's a host I like. I listen to them. I think they're great. And during the show, for like whether it's 30 seconds or 60 seconds, I learn about a new feature they have in their product. I don't even use their product, but if somebody were to ask me like, hey, do you know of a CRM tool that does this? I'm like, yeah, HubSpot, I think, does that.
And Christine, how about yourself? I know it humanized us because I got to listen to your voice a few times and then was actually able to meet you at events and do other things. So how can you kind of add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Eric, and I think Laura is a great example that we should all follow when it comes to social selling. She's amazing, probably the best. But I can tell you we're building a marketplace, and the most important thing is trust. And now whenever we have a call, a sales call or a partnership call, people say to us, Christian or Alex, I know you, I see you everywhere. And they already have the trust to work with us because they see the faces all over LinkedIn, on the podcast, webinars like this. So I think it's really about being out there and you humanize the brand. So TechPoint is not just a brand, but at first it's me and Alex. And I think this is, as well as Dream Data. It's Laura, MC, and all the other people. Stefan, the CMO. That's the goal. I love them.
And one of the questions that I wasn't thinking of, but it's kind of just popped up in my mind is where do kind of podcasts for businesses come from? Is it driven by someone in the organization like it has done with Dream Data, like Laura, who's amazing at social selling and wanted to kind of put a face out there? Or is it best driven from the business itself, thinking about ways in which it can put a better digital strategy together? What works best is kind of the chicken and the egg situation.
The individual, I would say. I would say the individual, because that's where that person, their personality, has the opportunity to shine, and they don't sound all corporate like that the typical brand would, right? I mean, the big companies out there, compliance would be like, okay, you can't say this, you can't say that, you have to say it this way. Whereas the individual has a chance to, let their personality shine through. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I'd say you probably, although they won't always start it, but you probably want, if you're going to do a podcast on a specific topic, and I always recommend if you're going to do a B2B podcast, get as niche and as close to your area of expertise on the subject as you can, and that includes the title of the podcast, the content format, and more. But a podcast isn't right for everyone, because some people just aren't cut out to be a host, which is fine. They might be able to build their audience on LinkedIn, like tons of people have done, and most B2B professionals are hanging out there. They might be better suited to maybe a YouTube series, maybe a newsletter. So first and foremost, work out if a podcast actually makes sense, because not only is it a ton of work to commit to if you're putting weekly or bi-weekly episodes, but also distributing the podcast. And if you actually want your podcast to get found, i.e. you're not doing an ABM play just to interview guests and build relationships, you want it to get found by a wider audience, it could potentially be leads. There's a lot of work, man. You've got to do a lot of work to get your podcast, well found and well rated and build that audience. So just be aware, depending on what play that you want to do and what outcome you want, there's going to be a lot of work to market it if you're doing it yourself. But yeah, I suggest get someone from the organization that's going to be a host that probably enjoys doing this kind of thing. And at the same time is going to be not afraid to chip in their opinion or their 2 cents if they are running an interview.
Yeah, there's if you're starting a show, a key thing that Sam touched on, my biggest mistake was the title, because Apple Podcasts' search engine is very similar to like Google was like 15 years ago. And my title of my show, Innovators Can Laugh, it doesn't have startup, it doesn't have founders in the title. And so I don't even rank that well when people are searching for a startup podcast. And so therefore it took me a really long time to build a brand. I think I would tell anybody it really takes at least 2 to 3 years to start building an audience of podcast listeners.
To add to that, so I learned a long time ago, or no, actually very recently, unfortunately, a long time ago, I wish I would have known this, recently learned that the best way to get people to do things you want them to do in the way you want them to do it, right? Take action on a call to action, book a meeting, whatever it might be, is to make sure your messaging, your calls to action are in a space or place and or describing an extension on the activity or motion or process that they're already in line in doing, right? So like by adding one more step or removing one more step or adding this one piece, the thing that you're already doing was an infinitely better way for me to get adoption, essentially, than to like invent something and then say, hey, here's a whole new tool, go live in here or that, which is why ecosystems and ecosystem marketing and integrations and kind of fits into that, right? Like, don't make me live in 6 different places. I've got enough, right? So on the marketing side of the podcast or the webinar, which is why part of what I made the shift to build the tool is, and this is just a recommendation. And if you want to learn more about this, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll drop a link in here, is like, where are some of the already existing high traffic points in your marketing funnel? What are those places, right? Newsletters, ebook opt-ins. Usually there's 1 or 2 ebooks you've written that are actually, pulling traffic. In the process of even signing up for your product, like what additional opportunities, attention can you capture, leverage, and redirect to something else in that one moment in time? And so for me, newsletters seem to be, newsletter opt-ins are like a really sweet spot and space where people are already thinking, top of funnel, audience, sharing information, give me more. But like, what are we putting in front of them in order to capture and leverage that attention? And so I'll save, this is not the Justin Zimmerman sponsored show here, but if it was, I'd say I've developed a tool to help capture that attention, where at the moment of registration, you present them another offer, right? Maybe it's your podcast, maybe it's, and there's things that you could put in that sequence of events where you happen to capture their attention and then make that offer. And maybe the offer is, here's our podcast, go download it, or here's the link, here's an episode. And so I would say try to find some high leverage points that already have traction around your content and your audience, and then put calls to action to drive attention and awareness and consumption, subscription, whatever it might be to those things.
So Sam, you mentioned about the hard work that goes into the longevity, building longevity into a podcast. So what are some of the strategies that you kind of found to make sure that you were able to constantly create content, get great speakers in the diary, and keep the momentum and keep things running for the many years that you've been able to do so?
Grit and foolishness. And I'm very stubborn. No, like I say, for the first year or so, I did it with no strategy. I just did it from a selfish standpoint. And then I realized that I wanted to get some business from it. So I suppose to give the ideas that I use. So if I'm doing solo episodes, then they might quite literally be questions that I get asked on sales calls, then addressing that with like a searchable title, i.e. something that's going to be evergreen on YouTube, as well as the podcast, i.e. how to do X, or best way to do Y, or the guide to doing Z, that's relevant to our offerings in terms of SEO, websites, or podcasts. So quite a lot of that, or again, common objections or frustrations that are raised on prospecting or sales calls. Those are really good because they're going to be in demand by a lot of other people asking the same thing, or trying to learn the same thing, or overcome the same thing. That tends to work. Aside from that, guest episodes, usually just on our form, like we send them a Calendly form, and one of the fields is what is the area of expertise that you can share an actionable kind of 30-40 minute show around, and I give them a link to past episodes so they can check if it's something slightly new, and it just makes my life a lot easier. So I suppose it's just getting a flow, getting a system, a bit like Justin said, setting up systems whereby you've got easy ways to maybe start simple with a Google Sheet where you just note down questions you get on sales calls, maybe comments that you've seen on LinkedIn or posts that have resonate, and you start making a list of topics that you're going to do for your solo episodes. Then likewise for guest episodes, you do a similar kind of thing. Like, these are the people in the space that I'd really like to interview. Or if you're doing an ABM, account-based marketing play, these are our top 50 accounts. This is the VP of marketing. This is the CMO. Each account, I'm going to send them a personalized LinkedIn message that's painfully short and is 10 times better than any other sales outreach. It's going to catch their attention and they're not going to miss it. So just setting up a simple system of whereby you can meet your quota, whether that's one episode a week, one episode a month, whatever you're setting out, really.
Awesome. And Christine, I know you were driving across Europe, so that was definitely one way of getting people in the calendar.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing. Probably Justin will say it's a mistake, but so far we haven't sold anything to the podcast. We just focus on, a lot of people say to me that I talk very little in the podcast. I just make it about the guest. So I don't come in, put my perspective, just ask them all the questions and make it about themselves 100%. But we're trying to change that. So with the help of Eric, Dealfront will now be a sponsor to our podcast and his amazing community. So thanks, Eric, to that. So I'm not sure if it's a mistake, but I think it's really good for the audience that they're not feeling like it's being sold to them constantly. What's your take on that?
My take?
Yeah,
I was wondering. Okay, yes, definitely. I think so. Yeah, my contrary opinion is this: is you've got two types of people in your audience. You've got people here to listen and learn, which is how like 99.9% of most content and content marketing is designed for. And then my 1% opinion is there is another group of people who are at some stage of problem aware and solution seeking, and that you should, for those to capture that demand capture, also speak to those who are interested in trying and buying, but have not yet crossed the thresholds of getting that attribution we talked about earlier, where they're ready for a trial. Because usually a trial means like you got to talk to your boss, you got to have some things in place, right? People aren't ready to trial yet, or even take a demo. There's a lot of behind the scenes conversations before that threshold is even reached. So I try to, whether it's through this service and app that I've developed, or through just simple calls to action, to speak to that audience very clearly, very vocally, whether it's through polls polls and pop-ups and webinars or calls to action, holding up a title of an ebook. If you're ready or interested in searching for a webinar solution, right? Stuff like that. People will raise their hand, and so get the hand raisers raised and speak to them directly, so you can pull out of the audience those who are there just to try and buy. They're not going to be offended. You're not going to spend 20 minutes talking about your product or service. But like any ad that when you're on social scrolling this way, something pops up, you're like, oh, that speaks to me. Give your audience, for those who are in potentially market, the opportunity to raise their hand, pull them out. And like I said, drop those calls to action and find those who are ready to try and buy, but almost who are there to try and buy, but they need more. And so you can begin that sales conversation. Send them a sequence of case studies if it's a product-led / marketing-led motion, not sales motion. And that's my little inclusion there.
No, you're right. And do you think you can do it from the start of the podcast?
Absolutely. There's a lot of places to do it, and that's one of them. So yeah.
Yes, I think you've raised a good point, right? It's about almost building an owned audience. So like you said, probably don't want to start from day dot on your podcast, filling it with 10 different sponsors. So it's like 5 minutes worth of ads. But like you said, if you can pick a tailored CTA, like if you enjoyed the episode to learn more on XYZ or how to fix XYZ problem, why not try out my daily newsletter where I'm sharing this like each and every day, or whatever is relevant.
Yeah. And in kind of the B2B space, right? And I think Eric knows me from this, is like, when you do partner marketing, usually have like 1, 2, or 3 integrations that like stack really nice together as a common solution. And so when you do webinars and or podcasts, what you should do at the beginning, and it's just a service to the audience, because the audience doesn't often know like this app, that app, and this app even exist or even work together. And so like if you don't actually sit down in the beginning, do a initial infomercial around, for those of you who don't know, I'm here with Eric from blank and Stephen from blank. They're actually our integration partners. And we decided, if you don't already know, here's some of the quick little bits about what you need to know, how they work, and if it's of interest to you, and spend a little bit of time advertising the value of the integrations and how they work together to solve a common problem solution. Just take that time and then get into your content, get into the tactics, but you can do that high level. And I think it's a service to the audience to know that those exist and what those products are for and where to find them.
I guess one of the key words that came out of that was relevance. So if you can match the relevance to the CTA and make sure that it's engaging and hits on the right message, then it's definitely a great place to utilize it. So how do we, now we've built the podcast and started to get it out there, what are kind of some of the best ways to be able to promote it and make sure that you can be found and you can start to build a community and audience? And Eric, I'll start off with yourself.
Yeah, a couple of key things. One is always asking the guests if they can share it. One little hack that in our community that Leanne Dow's in our podcast community shared with us is, after a guest recording, she actually sends the guest a calendar placeholder on the date that the show is going to go live. And it's just a little reminder that, hey, our podcast episode is going to go live. And if you want to let somebody from your team know, coordinate with them, and so that they can plan your content calendar accordingly. This is the date that it's going to go live. So that's a neat little trick, and make sure that you send them at least a couple of assets that they can use, like an image or maybe a short video clip. The other thing that's worked out really well for me is YouTube. Previously, I kind of still am. I'm just uploading the videos to YouTube, not really doing anything particular. Not thinking about SEO, not creating, multiple thumbnails or even adding any clips, but still my YouTube videos are probably now getting 40% of total listens compared to my podcasts. And so it has helped find a new audience of listeners who actually are finding my show through YouTube. So that's worked out well. Things that haven't worked out well for me are doing a post about each episode and the topic on Quora. I tried that last year, and that really didn't work that well. In TikTok, uploading clips from my show on TikTok and using different hashtags, that didn't really work too well for me. I'm not saying it's not going to work well for everybody, but just for me personally, it didn't really generate a new audience of listeners. What about you, Sam? What have you found that's worked out pretty well?
Yeah, much the same, really. My keyword there would be remove friction. So if you're doing guest interviews, make it super easy for that guest, like you've shared some nice tips there. So you could literally send them an email just before it's about to go live with the Apple link, the YouTube link, the Spotify link, maybe the article page link as well. And then you say, here's the links. If you're going to do a LinkedIn post, here's a template post of some copy to use. And I attach an image. I attach 3 under 1 minute promo video clips. Take your pick. If you're kind enough to share it on a LinkedIn post, maybe your email newsletter, maybe wherever else your audience hang out, that's appreciated. And then likewise, in terms of our show promo, we just do it to LinkedIn posts, the company page, the email newsletter, and then we encourage guests to share it. And then, like you say, we upload it to YouTube and all the audio channels, and that's mostly it. And if you wanted to get more bang for buck, you could do some paid distribution, like with targeted LinkedIn ads to your ICP. That might be a bit advanced for bootstrapped companies.
Yeah.
But from your experience, Sam and Eric, how many people share it on their LinkedIn? Like 50% or?
About 50%.
I'd say about 50%. That's a good number.
Yeah.
It's from my experience, without being rude, it's usually the people that have a bigger following won't. So like if I pick specific niche guests that maybe got a smaller following on LinkedIn, they're happy to promote it. If you have the well-known B2B influencers, I won't drop any names. They ain't going to share it. It's just not going to
happen. you did just give me an idea on how to increase that percentage. So maybe trying to gamify it so that if you let the person know, like, hey, every quarter I send a drawing for those who shared the content, maybe some cupcakes or something. I don't know. Maybe that's just a crazy idea or not, but it's something I think I would try. And hey, I wouldn't mind sending cupcakes to a former guest, who shared my show. And maybe if word got around, like, hey, you can probably get, not just be on Eric's show, but get possibility of getting free cupcakes. Why not?
I received a letter from you from Texas, so I always
don't say I wouldn't do it. Either free cupcakes or a phone call from Sam. I don't know what that reward would be, but maybe it's like free 30-minute SEO Superman guru calling you to give you some SEO advice or something.
Awesome. Justin, I know you've got some great advice about promoting podcasts.
So obviously it's a little contrary to like the opinions here, or just different. I don't know how to say it, but okay. So here's what matters, and this is what I've discovered is whether it's a B2B influencer or another tech company, the reasons why people do things. Sorry, Eric, they're not going to do it for cupcakes. They're going to do it for audience acquisition, leads, and exposure of meaningful value. And so there was a quote from Nathan Laka, I think a couple of years ago on the Nearbound Summit, and I saved this because it rings true for me, is partners will pay attention when your audience pays attention. Something like that, right? If your customers watch you, partners will watch you. If your customers want your service, right? And so there's a relationship between the ability to drive eyeballs and traffic and the desire for partners to want to work with you, which is why American Express and, Salesforce work together. Like they've got massive audiences and abilities to drive traffic and audiences. And so people do things for those selfish reasons. And so how can we do that as micro companies of 1 to 10 with $0, right? And so that's where I feel like either the power of a webinar and or doing lead capture and inviting people to come to particular something like this. So that way, as you accrue email addresses, and there's viral loops that I've developed into my registration processes that were for every one registrant, I'll get 3, 4, maybe 5 people to refer and then come to the show, and not even come to the show, come to register for it. So like once I have the email addresses, once I have the profiles of the names and I do all the enrichment stuff, I'm now an advertiser. I have advertising level data on who's listening, who's watching, what roles and titles they have. And so, I can downstream repurpose that and then drive traffic to listen to the podcast. But the main value point, because in the end, I want action that I can take, not on the passive likelihood of someone listening to that episode and hearing the message, but now I've got contact information, oftentimes cell phones as well, for SMS messaging to do broadcasts out. And so what does an advertiser, what does a partner want more than anything, especially a big one? In fact, I can't name the name, but one of those influencers reached out to me and said, hey, I want to do a deal with one of your companies. I charge $10,000 for a webinar. And I said, well, we're not going to pay $10,000 because I know I can deliver more than $10,000 worth of value to you because we have this reach. These people people. And so we went from 10,000 to 0 because I knew how to leverage and understand the value proposition of coming and promoting, co-promoting with us in a way that they weren't going to accept or do otherwise. And so I just know audience acquisition and the ability to actively reach out is something that will get people who you really, really, really want to both be on your show and promote your show. And then once you have that top of funnel reach, people are going to sign up. They're going to get, and then you can repurpose it into the recording and podcast later. So I'm live audience acquisition, lead capture first. Get that data. You've got a leverageable asset that lets you leverage up and leverage up and leverage up. And then, downstream podcast and passive, even blog. I put podcasts and blogs in the same category as like people are going to find them. That's great. And if they do and they listen, wonderful. But like, what can you do on the front end to make sure you have control over as many of the outcomes and variables as possible?
Well, we've got just under 5 minutes left. So one of the things I'm definitely going to touch upon, because I know most CFOs out there are going to go, this is great content, but how do we tie it back to the return on investment? So what are some of the ways that you're analyzing your return on investment from the work that you're putting into podcasting? I know source revenue is a little bit easier to potentially touch upon than influencer revenue, but what are kind of some of the main things that you're doing and what's worked well? Who would like to kick that one?
I can do.
Awesome.
So with the podcast, I suppose really it's sales qualified book calls, growing the email list, and then sponsorships is probably how we're building the audience. And also people follow me on LinkedIn and the other stuff. So there's a few ways to think about it. Like Justin was saying, like clear, concise, relevant call to actions to where you want to take the audience off the listening to podcast or watching it on YouTube, wherever the format is, onto your email list, a lead magnet or something relevant, maybe booking a call with you if they're ready. So that's the main thing. And most of that is going to come from thought leadership content. So someone's got to have a lot of trust that you can deliver on what you say you can if they're going to book a call. So they might do something lighter touch first, like sign up to your email list or follow you on LinkedIn or subscribe to your YouTube or subscribe to your podcast, tune in for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, till eventually they have the problem you fix. Their company's ready to invest in it. They realize it's a problem that's frustrating them so much they got to do something about it. Then they'll reach out and book a sales call. And that's like Christian said, by this time they know and trust you. So it's going to be quite an easy deal, all being well. But aside from that, apart from getting people offline into email lists or your ecosystem, then sponsorships are another one. Bit of a tricky one in the B2B space, as it's not usually the traditional CPM model, especially if you've got like a niche audience, which I think is the way to go. You want to go as niche and specific as B2B podcasts are getting more crowded. So the more tighter kind of show you can do, the better. And then, you can look to pick up sponsors once you start building that audience of listeners or people viewing or whatever format it is. Then you can approach kind of relevant sponsors that are going after your audience. So in our case, Business Growth Show, B2B Marketing Podcast, we're B2B tech marketers, B2B tech founders. So we've got SaaS brands that like to sponsor the show.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's open. It helps open new doors and new opportunities. One of my roles big contracting roles that I got last year was due to the podcast. A founder knew me, and over time, because of the episodes that went out every week, he got a chance to just really understand me, learn about what I was doing. And as Sam said, every few episodes, you do want to have that solo episode where you're sharing your knowledge on the things that you're competent in. And so that's the first thing, just opening new doors, new roles, or new opportunities. The second thing is, I on my form where guests go and fill out before they come on the show, I ask them, what's something that you need help with your business? And I have a different selections. Maybe that's PR and brand awareness. Maybe it's SEO, and maybe it's personal branding. I think there's like 7 or 8 different options there, right? And without fail, every founder has something that they need help with in their business. And so after the recording, I will actually go out, and this is sort of automated, but say, hey, I noticed you needed help with, XYZ or whatever. It just so happens I know this person who's really good at that, and that person who's really good at that. Well, let me know if you'd like to make an introduction. And if they choose to let me make an introduction for them, I will. And all of those people, we have agreements. I have agreements with them that, if I send them referrals, I get a little, call it commission or whatever you want. But because I built that trust with the guests and all these people I've worked with or collaborated with in the past, and I trust and I know that they're really good at what they do, that's another way that helps me earn, I guess you would say, revenue, and not directly from sponsorships. So that's the other way that I guess I would say I gauge the ROI for my show.
Kristen,
I think the guys put it all perfectly. And from my perspective, it's more about relationship building rather than profit. But of course, you need to track it to see exactly if it's worth investing. Probably Justin has a better answer.
Yeah, my answer is I've built little systems. I have a visual I could show you that's like community and content. It's like 3 stages. I've actually started to write down what it is I'm just doing and figuring out, testing every single day into like an actual just single workflow of like, basically it's a sales process, that what happens on the community and marketing side. And then what happens in the next middle phase, which is like sales discovery. And so there's a connection between the two. And so what I'll notice, and I'm like, oh, wow, look at this. People like yesterday, I got a message like, Justin, just listen to your show. Oh my God, so much amazing. When I was a guest on a podcast or heard my own thing. And so really, it doesn't matter whether you're on other shows or not, as long as that you're out there in front of the audience. And so that might also be a strategy as well, is go book you or your CEO. If you're not ready to start a podcast, go start booking yourself on other shows to get like what's resonating and what messages are working. Because, I'll know someone's like, hey, I'm sure today in a week, 2-3 weeks from now, someone's going to watch or listen to this podcast. Justin, I heard you on, Deal Fronts thing. I love what you had to say. Well, I have a saying, conversations are good for business. And so if someone's listening and responding, then there's something underneath the surface. And so I have a conversational sales tiny little pieces of copy that I just respond back with that work. I go, well, what did you like? Is there something going on in your business? And then I'll start to tease out those inbound responses. And so I know when someone listens to something and they took enough action to look me up, find me on LinkedIn, that there's something underneath there, especially if I look at the role or title, to begin a sales conversation. It's not like, would you like a trial or demo? No, I got to do sales discovery work. And so one of the things that I've done that kind of ties all this together, and so I'm getting booked meetings from this exact approach, which is one way to measure the ROI, is instead of being strategic about inviting people to come onto my show, interview them as ABM, I almost do. I've got a play where I accidentally discover this, and now I'm doing the reverses. I'm finding someone very, very valuable and respected in the space that I live in partners and partnership webinars, to come interview me on my show. So now it's the reverse, where I'm the expert and it's them. And so I'm going to take this piece of content, because I'm already using it in my sales follow-up, which is something like, hey, like inbound, right? It's like, hey, Justin, listen to you on the Deal Front podcast show. Man, that was a great episode. Oh, great. Hey, thanks so much. Oh, by the way, question mark, what'd you like most? And are you doing webinars? If they reply yes or no, if they reply yes with webinars, I go, great. Because I'll say, I've got a playbook that might help you. And so what I'll do is then I'll go take the interview that I did with so-and-so, one of the most respected people, and hey, here, enjoy this. Let me know if there's, and then it furthers the conversation around is booking a time and what pain points and problems, right? Like, are there pain points and again, that's why I'm documenting this, to be a little bit more clear here. And so I just know that you can go from inbound lead, essentially, which is a LinkedIn request and message, to then a sales discovery motion, then using content that you've done on your podcast or other podcasts, whether you're the expert or not, around that topic, to then engage them around what next pain points or problems are going on in your business. And does that lead to, not at all qualified, or interested, qualified, and then, a meeting booked demo?
That's awesome. And it really does highlight all the different touch points that go on right the way through the sales cycle. So that's great. I know we're just coming up to time now, so we'll look to sign off. So if each of you just want to remind the audience of where they can find you and where they should follow, and then we'll end it there. So Eric, if you want to start off, and we'll just sign off for the day.
Yeah, the show podcast is Innovators Can Laugh. You can just go to the Innovators Can Laugh website.com website. And for the B2B Podcast Media Network, you can go to b2bpodpros.com. And again, any sort of SaaS brands out there that are looking to do podcast sponsorships across multiple podcasts, that's where you can learn more about my media network.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Sam?
Yeah, sure. So if you want kind of free daily tips, just follow me on LinkedIn, or if you check out samdunning.org, that's samdunning.org, then you can grab my top 10 weekly updated B2B marketing podcast, or apply to work with me for either consulting or launching and building out your own content machine or podcast.
Perfect. Christian?
Just wanted to say that if you are a podcaster, you need to join Eric's community because it's amazing and you learn so much. 10, 20 podcasters sharing the knowledge and all truth. But yeah, you can find me at Christian Dina on LinkedIn and also at techpon.com. Thank you so much for doing this.
And I guess I'm last here is G. Zimmerman. I'm used to it. I was in elementary school, always the last person alphabetically. So if you're interested in any of the things I mentioned, especially around building audiences, transforming audiences into pipeline and lead, the sales systems and the attribution and tracking, and I guess audience building as well around podcast audience and community, and you want some of my playbooks, you want to talk about them, just find me on LinkedIn, Justin Zimmerman, and you'll experience some of the things in real life, in real time, by just following me, DMing me, and we can go from there.
Amazing. Thank you all for your time. It's been an amazing episode, and I'm sure everyone will agree. Thanks again.